Hello and welcome to Defense Diaries. I am your host, Bob Mata, and this is a conversation that I am really excited about. I am a huge fan of Othram Labs and what they do and the potential of what they can do in the future. And I just, when I had the opportunity to be able to go visit Othram last year, I was so incredibly impressed with the lab and with both our guest today, David, and his wife, Kristen. They were just so down to earth, so friendly, so science nerdy that I love them. They were both just amazing people. And the lab was like breathtaking. It's just one of those labs. It's like I put in the thumbnail, which initially I spelled David's name incorrectly. He's like, "Hey, you spelled my last name wrong." I'm like, "Oh no." So I went and changed that. But the lab's so incredible. It's so incredible. And they put all their money that they make right back into research and development. That's why they're light years ahead of any other lab in the world in terms of what they do. They are absolutely unstoppable in terms of, I mean, they're as close to science fiction as we're getting right now. So without me wasting any more time, I'm going to bring David on because he's awesome. And let's talk to him. All right, let's see. Mandy. Hey, what's up, David?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to have you. Thanks for coming on. So I want to talk to you about a bunch of stuff. How much time do you have so I can kind of reel in my questions?
Um, let's just go through questions. I'll hang out for as long as I can.
All right, cool. All right, so before we get into kind of Othram and when it was born and the concept of it, so where did you grow up?
I grew up. I guess most of my life I've been in Texas, but when I was very little, I was in Boston, actually in Andover. So up in the Northeast. But most of my life went to school in Texas, and most of my life has been in Texas. Brief tour to Virginia, and mostly in Texas.
Awesome. And so where did you meet your wife? Where did you meet Kristen?
We actually met in Texas, in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine. We were both training in biomedical science. My background is human genetics, and hers was biochemistry. So we met in school, and it's been a professional and personal and every kind of partnership ever since.
Yeah.
So
I
together.
Yeah, you guys are an amazing couple. I had the same thing. I actually met my wife in law school, and she became my partner in my law firm. She's obviously the mother of my children, and she's my partner in this now too. And so it's like, yeah, we're a partner in all things. So which is always great, which I think is probably why I had a huge affection for you guys like immediately when I got to come down to the lab last year. It was just awesome. All right, so you guys both so you guys were both at Baylor?
Yeah, we were both at Baylor, different programs, but both at Baylor. And then Kristen took a big interest in, even though she was a biochemist, in intellectual property law, and eventually got interested in like how to fund science and grow the programs around enabling innovation. And I took the more boring path. I became a researcher and then a professor, ran a research group for a while. But then eventually my research interest pulled me into private industry. And so we've always supported each other. And like, even when she was working in, in funding, we were both at Virginia Tech. She was working, managing, $600 million of funding for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I was a professor. So even if we weren't working literally together, we were at the same place. But later I started a few companies, and we ended up really both taking a passionate interest in criminal justice, and in making sure that we could bring technology to this area, which we thought was substantially underserved. So it was just another of many opportunities to work together. But yeah, our original working together was from the grad school days, messing around in the halls of Baylor College of Medicine on, genetics and biochemistry experiments. And so we have a long track record together, as it seems you and your wife does.
Yeah. And it's kind of an amazing thing to be able to do that with your life partner. You know what I mean? It's like,
I feel very lucky.
I do too. I really do. It's like, I feel so fortunate, because it's like in a lot of different ways. I feel the same way. I'm sure that you do about Kristen. Like,
teenagers are building businesses with AI.
Allie's business, Allie's a brilliant woman, and I'm lucky to have her, in a lot of different ways. And I think that we complement each other perfectly in terms of what I bring to the table and what she brings to the table. So yeah, it's kind of an amazing thing. So when was Othram born, or the concept of Othram?
Well, we were interested, I will tell you, when you train at Baylor College of Medicine, and I love Baylor, but when you train at Baylor College of Medicine, they have medicine in the title. Like their key interest is biomedical. And so most of the people that trained in, like in my area in human genetics, they're interested in things like cancer, heredity, prenatal diagnostics, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the funding to Baylor College of Medicine is predominantly from the National Institute of Health, so the NIH. And so the funding's there, the focus is there. So the kind of problems that you get exposed to, they're all kind of medical questions. And that's where most of my work has been in biomedical science. And it was interesting because to cut a long story short, I got recruited along with the other folks. I was like the least important person that got recruited to Virginia Tech when they started a medical school. They started this Carillion Medical School, and they wanted to build a biomedical center at Virginia Tech. But when I came there, it was very different, because although they had the interest, Virginia Tech gets a lot of their funding from non-NIH sources. So from other branches of the government, from defense, from just all these other agencies I'd never heard of. And so you get exposed to all these problems that, I had never thought were even possible to explore. For example, when I first got down to Virginia Tech, I start hearing about, the interest in surveilling for like bioweapons and pathogens that, either intentionally or unintentionally could break loose and wreak havoc. And it's a very present thing. This was 2011, obviously years before the COVID outbreak and everything else. And so just getting exposed to those problems was really interesting. And while I was there, we had some folks come down and ask us, what could you do with this new emerging DNA technology? Because back then it was emerging. They didn't even know if it'd be working in the clinic. It was just kind of a research tool. But what could you do with this kind of technology in a forensic context to learn about, someone that's died, or, learn about someone that might have been involved in a crime? And back then I made a bunch of kind of hypothetical, kind of academic suggestions. And they asked what it would cost to do it. And I told them, and it was pretty expensive, 15 years ago to do this kind of thing. And they laughed at me and shook my hand and left. And I never heard from them again. But anyway, suffice to say, I got exposed.
Yeah, Did they pat you on the head too, right?
They were like, you stay in the university and we'll go work with people that understand things translatable into the real world. And so, but I will tell you, like, that's the life cycle of all technology. Everyone laughs at everyone. People, laughed at people for making VR goggles because those were only for gimmicks and toys. And now they are a central part of the U.S. government's military strategy. And the internet was also something that was just fun to play with, and then it became obviously integral to our life. And AI will be the next thing that is a gimmick and a toy that becomes valuable. So all technology starts that way. It starts with a pat on the head, and then it becomes something that's shockingly really important. But I wanted to work on this problem, and I was building and operating a medical lab. And when that lab was acquired, I was kind of looking for what to do next. And Kristen and I, and it was not just me, it was Kristen and I and a handful of folks that we had worked with for years, a few of them for over a decade. on these problems, we were wondering, like, what are we going to work on next? And we wanted to work on something that had really high impact, that other people weren't really working on. I like high impact problems that are just not being, solved at the moment for whatever reason. There's a lot of things to do in the world. People are moving in a lot of directions. So there's a whole bunch of folks doing a lot of great things in cancer, and adding one more is not going to, adding me into that is not going to, in my opinion, have a seismic impact. But here's a space where there are these, countless cases of people that are unidentified. It's a shock, because you have Wi-Fi on every street corner almost in America. But you don't know the identities of people that have been sitting on the shelf for years or decades. And all these crimes that aren't solved. Everyone talks about the CSI effect, but this idea that cases don't actually solve in the span of a 45-minute show. And so, again, not things I would have understood at Baylor, but as I began to learn more, I started to realize, like, there's actually quite a bit of unsolved, things that need to be resolved in criminal justice. And so we rounded up a good group of folks that really wanted to have an impact here. It's a little bit risky because it's a little bit off the beaten path for someone that's trained in genetics and diagnostics and medical work. But again, I just felt like, it's like few things are worth it in life that aren't going to be hard to pursue. And we really wanted to pursue this. So that's the origin of Othram. And we started the company in 2018 and set up shop. I didn't know anyone in forensics. I don't have a background in forensics, but we figured if we can build something that can have a meaningful impact on a case, it's just a matter of time. Right. I didn't realize in forensics, a matter of time really is more like a matter of long time. But nonetheless, it's worked out, and it's taken a little longer than I thought it would take. But people are coming around to the fact that they don't have to tolerate a case that just sits on the shelf unsolved forever. So it's fascinating now to see people begin to use technology. Yeah.
I mean, the concept is, if you build it, they will come, and they did come eventually. You know what I mean? It's like.
Yeah. I don't recommend that for everyone. I mean, usually you want to find a market when you start a company, but this is such an important problem that, if you really believe in it and you're passionate about it, like, and ultimately, if it's true that there is a problem that has to be solved, then you would expect people to come around, and that's the approach that we took, is like, we don't want to build the forensics of 2018. Like, we kind of looked at it and we're like, what would forensics look like in 2030, for example? What would we need when this is widely used as a technique? And that's why when you came to see the lab, like, instead of trying to build modularly, like, we said, you know what, let's build Othram 2030. Let's build it in 2018. And hopefully people just kind of jump on the bandwagon and join the project. And so that's why we've put such an investment of time and effort. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about scale. Solving a case is amazing. There's not a better feeling, but we're not interested in solving a case or two or three. We're interested in how we can make a seismic shift in how criminal justice works. And that's not solving a case or two or even 100. That's solving, like, 1,000, 10,000, 50,000 cases.
Yeah. Volume, like, quickly. It's almost like you're trying to be able to develop the software that allows law enforcement or whoever's going to be getting involved with it to be able to kind of do the work that y'all do on a grander scale. You know what I mean? As opposed, like, I think that's probably where the dream would be in terms of, say, I mean, obviously you're gonna say, all right, well, yeah, we've developed software based on all the work and the research and everything that we've developed in terms of advancing this technology. And now we've made it so y'all can use it. So you don't need to have a lab guy. And I could see that being like, that would be a seismic shift, where based on all of the work that you've done, all the research that you've done, everything that you guys have developed, where you've advanced the technology enough. And I imagine with AI that they'll be like, it'll be able to write that code, because for you guys, and when we kind of get in this conversation, I wanted to ask you about a different company that we had experienced back before you guys even existed. And it was in a case that Alice and I were handling, but I want to save that for later. But in terms of what I want you to kind of do for our little class here today, is, can you break down DNA and creating a profile and what that means, kind of just like as simply as you can for those of us who may not understand beyond what we watch on TV. They're like, oh, they made a profile. Like, explain it to us. So, like, we're 5 years old, so we all understand what it is that you do.
Yeah, and interrupt me and ask questions if you have any. So, you know, in the late 80s, a couple smart folks figured out that there are parts of the DNA that, even though we're like mostly the same, there are parts of the DNA that tend to vary, and they're easy to measure, and they vary from one person to another. And they discovered these repetitive parts of the DNA. So, like in your DNA, at the same location as mine, you may have 7 copies of this little string of DNA letters, and I may have 8 copies. And this happens reproducibly. And the other thing that's interesting is that people that are more related tend to have, you know, similar, you know, sets of values. But even forgetting that, there's a unique way to compute these like length variations in you versus me, which means in principle, if we both were at a crime scene, we should be able to determine if it was you or me based on measuring these markers. And so a DNA marker is just a spot in the DNA. If you unravel all 3 billion letters, you could say, here's one spot in which there's some information. There's some letters that are different from someone else. That's a marker. Marker could be one letter, it could be a bunch of letters, but that's a marker. And then if you take a bunch of markers together, they call that a profile. So a profile is basically a set of DNA markers. And if you pick the right markers, like I said, there's some math and other things to throw in there as well. And you definitely don't want me teaching you math. So I'm no math expert. So
I'm no math expert either.
So you collect these markers, and these markers essentially provide some information. Now, yeah, I see there's a question about, you know, about disease and, you know, genetic defects and that kind of thing. It's an interesting question because, you know, these markers are selected specifically because they uniquely identify someone or can show relatedness. So here's the interesting thing to note. These are specifically parts of the DNA that have no known function or obvious function. Let me tell you why. Because let's say there was a spot in your DNA that predicts your risk for, you know, dying, you know, from this terrible disease.
Yeah.
How many people are going to have variation of that spot? The ones that are having the variation won't be around to discuss it with you. So right. things that cause disease or some very obvious kind of outward thing, there's different selective pressures and different ways those variations vary. What you're looking for when you want to understand relatedness is just the idea. It's just, you know, theory of common descent, which is just basically like, look, if you and I are related, then pieces of DNA that don't have any function and in any specific selective pressure, they're just kind of floating around. DNA changes over time, and the less it's changed between you and me, the more likely we have a common ancestor, right?
Right.
So that's why when you're in forensics, or if you're doing the work Othram does anywhere, you always want to look for markers that don't have a specific function. And then also, like I said, vary. If there's an area that doesn't have a function, but also doesn't vary between you and me, it's not a useful marker. So anyways, long story short, that's
let me ask you a question based on that. So within a full DNA strand, right? And we always see that kind of that symbol of infinity is kind of representing a DNA. So you say there's over 3, but have you guys or have scientists or people that are in your field been able to identify what each and every one of those markers means?
No. There's, maybe a few percent of those 3 billion letters are going to make up what people call the regions of the DNA that produce those genes, right? And those genes are what then go on to make proteins that do things in your body. So a very small amount of that DNA is well characterized. The rest is not really understood, and there's a couple lifetimes of biomedical research necessary to learn about all of it. So you can think of the Human Genome Project, which I was part of in the 90s. You can think of the Human Genome Project like the Google Maps of DNA. Kind of tells you like where everything is geographically. But it doesn't tell you like who lives at each house or what the business, like what the actual information context is. So right. in the late 80s and in the 90s, people embarked on the Human Genome Project to kind of map out where all the positional information is. But that was the easy part. The hard part is then going in and figuring out what this information means. And right. as it turns out, early on, people had this idea that you could associate a specific position with, some, kind of outward thing. And the truth is, and they call these Mendelian disorders, mostly because if you remember from from grade school, there was this monk, his name was Mendel. He was, mixing peas together and making all sorts of weird combination of pea plants based on mixing them together. And so this led to this idea of Mendelian genetics and the idea that there are like these versions of genes that can create, interesting little traits like tall plants, short plants, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. In the reality, that ends up being the exception and not the rule. So for example, sickle cell anemia is caused by one DNA change in one gene. That's actually a rare thing. In reality, most of these kind of properties of how we are, whether clinical or subclinical, they're really complex. And so there's a whole bunch of variants all working in concert to exert little effects that in aggregate shape who we are. Anyways, that's a 10-hour story.
Yeah, but dude, it's so
you don't want to go down the road on. But my point is, from the perspective of forensics, the idea is we just want to focus on the positional information. What we want to know is that at certain spots in the DNA, things vary. That's number one. In a population of people, do things vary at a certain position? If so, you can call it an informative DNA marker. That's what a DNA marker is.
Okay.
And then if you take a bunch of markers together, you've got a profile. And so what happened is, the Bureau, the FBI, built a system called COTUS.
Right.
And it was nationalized in '94. Congress said, let's take this nationwide. And the idea was, let's catalog a core set of these markers. And there was like 8 markers. Now there's like 20. And so over the last 30 years, they've developed the system, now has about 20 markers. And this system allows you to essentially track, essentially if someone's been at more than one crime scene. You get into COTUS because you've been identified as having, perpetrated a crime and you've been convicted. So say you do something terrible to me and they find markers, 20 of them that match you and my crime scene. They'll say, Bob was at this crime scene. They stick you into COTUS. And then if you were involved in a previous crime or if you do something into the future and it ever gets loaded into COTUS, they can say, now we've associated Bob not just with David's crime scene, but with a second crime scene. And it's a very powerful system. It's great, but it's got limitations. For example, if you're working human remains cases, right? All these unidentified people, tens of thousands of people in this country unidentified, something that really bothers me. And it's why Othram works so many of these unidentified cases. Then how does COTUS help? It doesn't help. And it turns out, I think, the success of using STRs, just to kind of blindly hope that your guy or gal might be in the database. It's like in the low single percentage points. It doesn't work. And so you need a better way. And likewise, if you're working a crime that, predated COTUS, or if the person hasn't been caught yet, maybe they're very young and they're at the very beginning of their, illustrative career in crime, then you basically have to wait till they get caught to retroactively then tie them to crime scenes.
Right.
So this is the story of everything prior to where Othram comes in. So we came up with a way where we can robustly build DNA profiles, but instead of 20 markers, we're looking at, we might look at 500,000 markers.
Right.
A lot more information. It's a different kind of information, and we can go into that if you want to. But these profiles are really great because, first of all, they can be built from almost any evidence. So you sometimes hear about the evidence, it's DNA is too old, there's not enough DNA, it's degraded. This word everyone uses in forensics, degraded DNA, which we can talk about if you want. All these limitations are not really limitations for this newer kind of testing. And
that is what I want to talk about, because when I came down to the lab and when we were talking about kind of the SNP technology that you guys developed, it blew my mind, because I've been hearing that forever. Look, I'm a Chicago guy. My dad was John Wayne Gacy's defense attorney. I am actually an advocate for the victims in that case. I believe that there's additional victims, but beyond that, there's still, like, I talked about this with you when I was at the lab. I've been trying to get the Cook County Sheriff's Police to work with you guys specifically, because there's still 6 kids unidentified from Gacy's victims from between 1972 and 1978. And with the existence of Othram on this planet, there's no reason whatsoever, because I know they have the bones. I know that you guys could develop the profile. And I don't know if Jason has reached out to you, because I peppered him nonstop. I'm like, why are we waiting on identifying these victims that these families have been waiting for
Yeah,
40 plus years? Dude, it's crazy. So yeah, I do want you. Will you explain? Because going back to COTUS, like COTUS, in terms of when you make it into COTUS, if they're going to put you in, you have to, that's their minimum, right? There's got to be at least 20 markers in terms of when they find DNA.
Well, they only measure, yeah. So just to be clear, like COTUS only measures 20 markers. So there's a minimum amount of like quality and quantity and like condition of the DNA, but you know, the STR testing used in COTUS only looks for those markers. So whether there's more markers available or not, you're just going to get 20.
Right. And I mean, what you've done, you and your lab, is you've made that basically irrelevant with what you guys have been able to do. Like, so basically tell us here what exactly how you described what you guys have been able to do with the new technology in terms of degraded DNA. Like, that just doesn't, from when we came to visit the lab, because we all sat and you guys gave a beautiful presentation and it was super informative, and I was like enthralled. So kind of just give us the idea and the people out there what you guys are able to do now.
Sure. And I just want to point out the fact that we can do the work we do doesn't invalidate COTUS. I think
100% now
they work together, because COTUS is very gradually linking together all the crime scenes in America, right? The issue with, and COTUS will confirm an identity. The issue with COTUS is that it just doesn't find someone that's not already in the data system, right? Like, so if you're not already known, it's hard to find someone with COTUS. But when you do find someone, then the very first thing is you put that person into COTUS, and then without a single dollar spent, you've now associated that person with any other crime scene they would have been involved in.
Exactly.
So I think the two are synergistic. But to address your question, you need very little DNA to do the kind of testing we do. So someone might say, is there no other way to do this kind of new SNP testing than what you're doing? Of course there is. There's just no way to do it, robustly on small quantities of DNA. So we can work from a handful of, human cells and get a really great outcome. There was a case in 1989 out of Vegas, a young girl that was raped and murdered on her way to school, like in broad daylight in Vegas. It was crazy. It was 1989. There's no cameras or anything. Wow. They had no idea who it was. And there was maybe, a dozen or so cells worth of DNA left. And we were still able to get a great result and identify the person responsible. And when we did, it turned out he had already died. He had never been put into COTUS because he was never found out. But here's the crazy thing is they were able then to link him by testing other crime scenes that were unsolved in the area. And it turns out he'd harmed a number of folks. In fact, he was arrested, believe it or not. He was arrested and brought to court for murdering another woman and raping her in her home. But the DNA technology at the time was ambiguous in terms of establishing this connection, and the judge dismissed it. So years later, LVMPD was able to not just solve this case involving this girl, her name was Stephanie Isaacson, but was able then to connect them to other crimes. And so one test ended up closing a number of cases. And that's a good example of our work and COTUS working hand in hand. The other issue you hear about is degradation. So there's a lot of ways to ruin DNA, unfortunately. But the one that they're talking about when they talk about degradation is that as DNA gets old, instead of being that big giant piece of DNA that you see in the cartoons or in the biology books, it begins to fragment into smaller and smaller pieces. And you need big chunks of DNA to do STR testing. Because remember, we were talking about it. The STR testing is measuring repetitions. So if you have like 50 repetitions, let's say, of some DNA sequence, you have to at least be able to measure that length to be able to know if you have these repetitions. But if the DNA is broken into little itty bitty pieces that are smaller than the size of the marker you're testing, then it doesn't work. And so you end up with what forensic scientists will tell you is no profile or a partial profile.
Right.
And that's no good. What we do relies on very small segments of DNA, so tiny that it works on rootless hair. It'll work on like 30 DNA letters together. Like it can work on very small chunks of DNA. So no matter how degraded the DNA is, essentially degradation doesn't impact at all the work we do. We're pretty much insensitive to it. We can, again, work from very small quantities. And then we've just over the years, and I think when you came down to visit, we did a tour a couple of years ago, and even now, like, you know, our biggest competitor each year is ourselves last year. So
Yeah.
Othram
Right.
2025 is on a mission
Right.
to kick Othram 2024's rear in being able to do this kind of work. So we're always competing against ourselves, but there are so many things that can happen to DNA. Degradation is the least of it. Sometimes people will apply detergent to the skeletal remains, and the detergent breaks up the DNA. People heat things. You know, there are people that are found charred in fires, and that wreaks havoc on DNA. If you've ever, you know, delved into true crime, you probably know about formaldehyde or formalin fixed material. You know, when they do autopsies, they use a preservative so that the slides look good and the biological material stays intact. But what that does is it basically freezes that material. And then if you try to, reconstitute it to get the DNA, it just bursts into a million pieces. I don't know if you've ever seen those boards where they collect butterflies and they put a pin in the butterfly and then they spray something on it and it looks great. Like 5 years later, a butterfly looks like it died last week. But if you touch it, it just bursts into dust. That's what formaldehyde does to DNA. So it can make it look really nice and you can put it up on the wall. But then if you try to rehydrate that material, everything breaks into a bunch of itty bitty pieces. And so how do you get DNA, not just from degraded DNA? How do you get these profiles, not just from degraded DNA and not just from small amounts, but from chemically damaged DNA, either because there was intentional or unintentional chemical damage, exposure in the sun. So believe it or not, it's not where we thought we were going to end up, but we now have the most successful protocols from working with skeletal remains. And we've had this very tight partnership with NamUs and RTI, which is the contractor for NamUs, since 2022. And in the last 18 months, we've been able to use this technique to identify with DNA more people out of NamUs than has probably been identified in the entire history of NamUs.
It's incredible.
Because again, like, what are you going to do if you don't have an idea or a reference or a speculation? You just have a skeletal piece that was found in the road.
Right.
What do you do with that? There's no context. And so we just announced a case yesterday, a guy that had been unidentified for I don't know how long, for decades. And, you know, with a little bit of DNA testing and some of this family tree stuff that we haven't got into, you can identify who they are. And the same is true for crimes. There's going to be there's a couple other cases dropping this week. One involving the murder of this guy and the assault of his friend. I don't want to steal the thunder from the agency, but this will be out this week. And, you know, we were able to identify the person that's now been arrested, who's still alive, thank God. It's a very old crime for murdering the guy and assaulting the girl. And it just, you know, the only regret I have is it took decades to go find this person. So the short answer is, like, we have the technology
that
to
was
work.
That was an insane teaser, by the way. That was an insane teaser for like all the people that are watching who are all true crime people. You know, that's like, they're like, what case is he talking about? So
you'll know in the next day or two. Yeah, like if you guys are as excited as I am, you can we have an app, like an Othram app, you can get from the App Store. Then it basically will give you push alerts every time we announce a case, and then you can also check out our website. But we try to provide as fast as we can real-time updates anytime we're involved in a case. We need the permission of law enforcement, and of course, if there's going to be a press conference, like, we wait for that to happen. But we try as quickly as we can to provide context. So yeah, if you can't wait and this teaser is too much for you, get the Othram app. You'll get a push notification the second we announce it, but it'll be in the next day or two.
Yeah, and I subscribe the old-fashioned way via the website, so I get dude, like I've since I visited the lab, and when I heard about you guys as kind of a lab initially before I went on the tour, I was like, wow, this sounds like that they're doing just amazing work. And it's interesting how you guys, in conjunction with NamUs, how you kind of got into that John and Jane Doe, the people that had been unidentified. Sometimes I think when I was at the lab, you've gone as far back as 100+ years, where you've got the range in the years in which you could go back where you're able to develop a profile is like mind-boggling. which
There's
is
a
why
case-
I was asking about the Gacy thing. I mean,
Oh
that's
yeah,
all I have.
none of those victims should be unidentified. I'll tell you, like in just 30 seconds, there's a case out of Ventura, California. It's on our website too. They called this woman the 1985 Jane Doe because they found her remains in the woods in 1985. We do the DNA testing, and it's really weird because she doesn't have any even remotely recent relatives. And we discover, long story short, that she was born 165 years ago. And what happened is her grave was robbed. She was already known. Her grave was robbed, and they took whatever they thought was of value and threw the rest of the remains in the woods. And that was apparently in 85. So here's a woman born 165 years ago. So you can tell everyone, if your case is less than 165 years old, then we're here to help. And I hate to think, for these unidentified remains, not only is it just like a constant burn of effort and stress for the agencies and everyone else, but the family members are not around forever, and getting them answers when they're not around to receive them is just terrible. There was a case in Utah. We identified a guy that was found in the mountains like almost 100 years ago. No one knew anything about this case, didn't even know where to like place the details, and we were able to get with family right before Christmas, let them know that their father and grandfather did not leave, did not start a new family. He had died in the mountains and no one knew. So I just think there needs to be just a ton of more urgency, and we need your listeners and everyone to demand this, because this is how things work. If we don't demand it, it doesn't get done. But there's technology now that should be able to put names to most of these people, and no one deserves to be unidentified in perpetuity.
I agree. And I mean, you're giving that person their name back. You're giving all the loved ones that have been wondering and where is my loved one for the last 30, 40, 50 years? I mean, you're giving people closure. It's just, to me, and you guys have the ability to do it. And I like the Gacy thing just drives me nuts, because that one hits close to home for me, because I know that these families, and at this point it's extended families because it's 40 plus years. You know what I mean? But like, these people deserve to know the answer. They deserve to know who these kids were. So like, I'm going to keep pushing the Cook County Sheriff's Police to be working with you guys. Here's my problem. I don't understand what the issue is from their end.
There can be a lot of issues, and some of them are sometimes technical, some of them are other things, and some of these higher profile cases, it's kind of odd, but like for the higher profile cases, it can actually be harder to help, because there's all these people coming out of the woodwork, and they're like, I have a magic solution. We worked, one of the first cases we worked is actually the first case that's on our podcast that we can talk about later. But there was like a psychic that was like, send me home with the clothes of this victim, and I will have a dream and I will figure out the answer. So there's so much input coming to the agencies. It's sometimes hard for them to discern what to do. And so it's kind of counterintuitive, but the more well-known cases can be harder to work, just because the agency is saturated with a bunch of tips and ideas and suggestions. But we will try to help. But before we continue, I just want to point out, there's the unidentified remains problem. There's the identification of people that do terrible things. And I think the majority of bad things happening are perpetrated by a minority of folks. They just need to be identified and taken off the street. But the other side of this is also, making sure that we can effectively exonerate people. And there's a number of cases that we've been involved in where, we've been able to help find the real person. In this case, the Carla Walker case, the boyfriend was under suspicion, and we discussed this on this episode. And he didn't feel like there was true exoneration until they found the person responsible. Because even if he's eliminated, someone on the internet or back then, in the social circles will say, oh, you were eliminated, but it's a technicality. We know you did it. Like, finding the person responsible is a true exoneration. And we had a case in Michigan that we recently put up where they had, gone after this guy for potentially being involved in the murder of his girlfriend. And then, the prosecutors did a great job of going back to all the evidence and saying, I want to be so sure. I want to look at every piece of evidence. And there was a cigarette butt left at the scene. We tested it, tied it to a guy from Utah that had no obvious connection, other than when they went to go talk to him, they found the gun that was used to kill the girl. And so
Wow.
all of a sudden there's more information. And so, no detective goes to a crime scene and says, I just want to see some of the crime scene. They want to see everything. And so
Right.
the same should be true for DNA testing. The idea is get certainty about what happened, get the truth. And then you may identify a suspect, you may exonerate someone, and you may have to identify the victim if they can't be identified. But the idea is just to bring the tools to criminal justice in total so that we can just get the truth and stop speculating, and then do what needs to be done to get families their answers and justice secured for all parties.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because from the law enforcement side, obviously you can see the utility in it, because like you said, and I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I've been dealing with, in terms of the DNA and understanding that COTUS, in terms of their database, is still very, very small because, as you said, there's only a couple of sources. There's once, and it depends on the state, but typically after somebody's convicted, they have to provide their profile or give a buccal swab or a buccal swab in order to get the profile into COTUS. So if you're convicted, typically some states have it where if you're arrested, they'll get it and then they'll get it in the system. Or like you said, when they go and process crime scenes and they find DNA and they're able to get it and they process and they're able to get a profile, then it goes in. So you have those two sources. And again, that's based on early technology, right? So it's not based on what you guys are able to do now. So there is a very synergistic relationship between what you guys do and what they're able to do. And my question for, like, is the DNA solves, which you guys, that's part of what you guys do as well. Is that bringing in the IgG aspect of it?
Well, Othram does everything end to end. And so we'll do the advanced testing. And then I just want to point out a lot of these cases go to genetic genealogy, but not all of them have to. Sometimes there's other reasons. Like, for example, if you have someone that you identified from 200 years ago, there may not be a close enough relative to use STR or COTUS testing. So then you need our testing for that. So there are actually many reasons to use these newer kinds of profiles. It's just that genetic genealogy is the one that's on the news the most. So Othram does all of that. DNA Solves is a site that we built for two reasons. Originally, we built it to drive awareness because when we first started, people were like, okay, maybe you can solve one or two cases, but this technique isn't going to actually work for most cases. So DNA Solves was a way to basically showcase by example that it can be done. And then we discovered that once people said, okay, fine, I guess the technology does work, but there's no money for it. Or there must be some other reason. We started crowdfunding cases, and the crowdfunding was a really interesting experiment. I don't believe that we should crowdfund all the cases in this country, but crowdfunding is a really magical way to show legislators and people all across the country that the only bottleneck in solving these cases was money. So it's not like there was a legal issue, a science issue. Man. It's not because the agency didn't want to help. Like all these cases across the US from different time periods, different circumstances, people of different historical origins, and somehow they all magically get solved as soon as dollars get funded on the site. So I think there's no better way. I like to lead by example. There's no better way to prove that the limitations are really just in prioritizing it and funding it than to build DNA Solves. So DNA Solves was a weekend project for some of us at Othram. We just threw the site up together for fun. Had no idea it would take such an interest, and it kind of became its own thing. But yeah, we are all Othram. DNA Solves was just kind of a way to educate and lead by example. Instead of bragging about my capabilities, we just wanted to show you outcomes. I really believe in outcomes over anything else, over marketing. So you'll see, like, we don't do a lot of marketing or advertising. Our advertising is our app.
Results,
which,
right?
Yeah, it just shows you.
Yeah.
And I saw there was a question earlier.
You don't have to say Othram is awesome. Like when I get the alerts that you guys have ID'd another John or Jane Doe or helped solve a cold case. I mean, that's the advertising. You don't need to say, hey, look how awesome we are. You just say, this is what we did. You guys are real modest about it. You're just kind of floating there in the background, just always omnipresent in terms of getting this stuff done. And it's like, that's
eventually we'll whittle away at all the excuses. And, I figure, I don't know if it'll take 500 or 5,000 examples, but at some point people will say, I guess technology works. And so,
Well, and that's
yeah.
that's the thing, right? That's like, because technology scares people, because it's like the same thing is with any part of your life. It's always the thing that you fear the most is the unknown, right? Like that's, but just because you just don't understand it, it could be, oh, I don't want to go to you're having some kind of weird pain, but you really kind of don't want to go to the doctor because you don't want to find out that you have something terrible. But that fear of not knowing what it is crippling. So it's, what I mean? The technology is the same way in terms of not having an understanding, not knowing what it is, and it scares people. So the best way to approach it is exactly what you guys done, where you just show people it works. This is how it works. It's nothing to be afraid of. That the technology is something. And I was going to ask you, are you guys going to start incorporating AI? Because like I would think that the advancements that can come from AI would be amazing, but it can also be terrifying in the sense if it does become sentient. You know what I mean? It's like I've got a real double
AI Judge Dredd.
Yeah. I mean, seriously though, it's like I've got a lot of consternation about AI. I can obviously see the benefits of it. I truly can. In terms of it being hyper intelligent, super intelligent beyond anything that we can understand as human beings, and being able to collate information that we've been able to gather over the course of our time as a species and be able to do it in a way that we just wouldn't be able to think about is amazing, right?
Yeah.
The flip side of that, the danger behind all that terrifies the hell out of me. So
yeah, I can tell you about how we use AI, but AGI is something you'll want like some AI expert. This is out of my zone. I'm just a DNA guy, so we'll silo me and I'll stay in my lane. So here's the thing. You may have seen it said before. I didn't invent this phrase, but technology. Sometimes people describe technology as like a lever on the world. It's a way to do more with less.
Right.
And there are 800,000 law enforcement officers in this country. Something you may not know is there's like, I don't know if it's 140 or 150 billion dollars, but some wild number of dollars being spent at the local and state level on policing. And most of it in big cities like Los Angeles, New York, Houston, most of it spent to support this salary for these 800,000 officers that have a lot of stuff to do. And the thing is, more and more crimes remain unsolved if they're not mostly getting solved. There's more crimes each year, and there's other responsibilities that law enforcement has. So we get to this inflection point where like manually working a case becomes intractable at some scale. And so then the question is like, what technology can you bring to bear? And DNA testing is a really great way to get some certainty. Like instead of spending forever manually investigating things and using DNA as a way to confirm it at the end, you should be measuring DNA from a crime scene at the beginning. Imagine if they had done that and found this cigarette butt in the case I told you about from Michigan. So it should be a frontline tool to gather some kind of intelligence about what happened. And to answer your question, we've been using AI for years. We've been using AI for so long that it used to be called machine learning. Now it's called AI. It'll be something else next week. And we've used machine learning to allow us to do more with less. Othram is a finite organization. We only have a finite number of people, and we want to continue to scale. So we built a lot of tools to help us, automate and simplify things that we do. AI doesn't replace the operator, but AI is a really great way, especially with some of these newer systems, to collate information that a human can review. And so we have kind of a mantra here at Othram: never send a human to do a computer's job. And we look for what are the things that a computer can do to make the human's life easier, and then conserve the very little human effort that we have available, comparatively, to focus on things that a human needs to do. So we actually have a tool that I welcome you guys to go play with. If you don't like genealogy, it'll probably not be a fun tool. But anyways, you can go to maps.othram.com, and people that build family trees, they use this format called GEDCOM. This format it was developed by the Mormon Church. I believe it predated the World Wide Web. It's very old, but it's a good format. and everyone uses it to describe family trees. You can build a tree on Othram Maps from scratch or using a GEDCOM file if you've ever done genealogy. And we built AI right into it, and it's not flashy like you had mentioned. And I tell people, like, we're not out to like advertise. We're interested in outcomes. So I don't have like an advertisement running saying Othram uses AI, but it's obvious when you use this tool. We can suggest potential relatives. We find additional information in the public records about folks, and these are things that a human could do. It's just you'd need a lot of humans, Googling and searching and looking for things. And we've built data systems that can do a lot of that up front. And what that means is, in terms of outcomes, is that a genealogy project that could take 3 months might only take 3 weeks, or maybe even a few days. And so we're always looking for opportunities to leverage AI. Othram Maps is a newer thing that we built. We built it this year, but even before that, we use machine learning and computer modeling to help kind of make better sense of the data coming off these machines. Even if you have the best lab methods in the world, the DNA is damaged and degraded, and there's going to be a lot of abnormalities and kind of anomalies that you need to be able to account for. And the biggest question when you do data analysis is what is signal and what is noise? And so computers are actually really good at helping you kind of estimate what is likely to be the true signal and what is the noise. And so getting a computer to do that, whether you call it, modeling, machine learning, AI, I think that's a great use of AI. And then again, I think having, the modern systems that exist, and you guys can try this out in our Maps tool, having it help kind of piece together facts from the public records or surface sources and materials that you could use, I think it's very powerful. So we've been using AI for a while. We're always interested in how to use any technology, DNA, AI, anything to help produce information that would allow investigators to get to certainty quicker. That's really the goal at Othram, is we want to help bring certainty to these investigations. We don't want to spend years or decades guessing what happened if there are tools available that could tell us what happened.
Yeah. And so I kind of want you to kind of go back to the basics. Where can you derive DNA from in terms of skin sample? Like, just, I want you to educate people in terms of where it comes from. So blood, obviously, saliva, skin. So where can you draw a profile from in terms of your lab?
There's anywhere where there's DNA, we can grab it. And sometimes it's, skin. Sometimes it's dried blood, can be saliva, could be really any tissue from your body. It could be, the cigarette butt, the filter has been in your mouth. It's soaked up some of the saliva. Those cigarette butts are actually a really great place to get DNA from. It could be, sweat from a piece of clothing you're wearing. There's just so many places. I can't even remember offhand all the places we've gotten DNA from. Not all skeletal remains, but good chunks of skeletal remains and parts of your body are going to be productive for DNA. So honestly, it's very hard not to leave DNA somewhere if you've been somewhere for an extended period of time. And so if there's DNA to be found, we can generally find it. And then we talked about how we can take challenging scenarios and still piece together a profile that represents an unknown person at a crime scene.
Yeah, and so you guys were involved with the Koberger thing, right? To some level. And so, and I was always of the mindset, and you keep hearing people talk about, and I'm a defense lawyer. So I'm obviously abundantly aware of the fact that trace DNA can be a problem. Transfer DNA can be in terms of the source of how it got there, not in terms of what you guys can pull in as a profile, but how it ended up getting there. That's where you kind of live in the world of the defense attorney. Like, we acknowledge you pulled a valid profile, single contributor profile off that thing. It is what it is. The question of how it got there, that's a different story, right?
Well, so I want to say something specific about this case. It's kind of weird because we worked another case afterwards. It was the Rachel Marin case. Do you remember the Rachel Marin case?
I do.
Same scenario, right? A lady is murdered, and then in real time, we're able to identify with the law enforcement agencies who's responsible. That case wasn't gagged, and so there was immediate kind of like explanation of what happened, and it just went a different direction. I want to say two things about this case. The first one is, for over 2 years, everyone, including Othram, right? Anyone that knew anything about the case was gagged from speaking on it. And so guess what? The only ones speaking on it are people that didn't know about the case. So all this chatter of trace and transfer and everything else, like, don't believe everything you read on the internet. There's going to be tremendous disclosure from the agencies. I had read that Moscow PD is preparing information right now, and all these documents are going to be public. And I think you will be shocked and probably very saddened when you discover how much of the gibberish that's been floating around in the last 2 years was actually gibberish. So I cannot be more excited for more information to become available. Having said that, I don't think it applies to this case, but you're right. In general, if you have quantities of DNA that are very low, it's important to ask, how they got there. And here's the thing about DNA testing. DNA testing can tell you whose DNA it is, but DNA testing doesn't tell you who committed the crime. DNA testing doesn't tell you, why the DNA was there, right? DNA testing tells you whose DNA was it. And so you're absolutely right that it is the job of the investigators, the prosecutors, and the defense attorneys to, really contextualize this information and figure it out. The goal of Othram is not to tell you who the suspect was or who should be exonerated. The goal of Othram is to analyze the evidence in a way that is a lot faster and cheaper and easier than ever before, and provide certainty. Because the problem, my opinion is that the problem in criminal justice, and yes, there's bias and corruption. I don't dispute all that, but like, the real problem for me, the enemy of criminal justice for me, is uncertainty. Because you've got Bob, the defense attorney, and you've got someone else, a prosecutor, going to court, and you both have to argue with certainty about something for which there is not certainty. This is, in my opinion, the source of most of the delays in justice, wrongful prosecutions. So the goal of Othram is to simply bring certainty. Come to the table and say, this cigarette butt belongs to this person. Now, I can't tell from DNA if that cigarette butt is relevant to the scene. Maybe someone threw the cigarette butt on the scene the day before, and it's a coincidence. Maybe he threw it on the floor after he murdered the person. So I think that's something to, and I think that's what you were touching on, is that's something to always think about, is like, what was the source of the DNA, and how probative is that evidence to the crime scene? And so I can speak to you forever about how to identify someone from DNA, but I'm not going to know from a DNA sample, whether it's probative. I depend on other members of criminal justice to determine that, and then on the prosecutors and the defense individuals to then debate that in court. Having said that, I will tell you that it's completely misrepresented in this case. And so as these documents come out, and I think there'll be a lot of discussion on this case, probably starting after tomorrow. I certainly can't wait to share details as well, because again, it's been very frustrating to see something and to know something, and then to have to wait for 2 years and let a bunch of other folks that some of which have their own bias come in and speculate on what may or may not have happened. So anyways,
I'm ready for that, and it's
finally time. It's finally time.
And when Hitler came in and kind of unsealed everything, I was thrilled with that.
Yeah, no, it's a good direction.
Because we're not supposed to try these cases in the dark. I'm big on having things out there because these are supposed to be public trials. I like holding the government responsible for their actions, and you can only do that by watching what they're doing and being
able to hold Othram responsible, and you need to hold the science responsible. So we have I know we talked a lot about the details, and my guess is everyone's eyes glazed over, so I apologize. But if there's like one person that's still interested, we have a website, research.othram.com. We detail all of our methods. We explain all these topics. I've explained what degradation is. I try to explain any topics I can in a semi-layperson capacity. The work we do, we publish it in peer-reviewed scientific journals. So this isn't something I made in the kitchen and I'm like, look, I've got a black box solution. I don't like black box. We publish in scientific journals. They're peer-reviewed by other members of the scientific community, and we bring them to court to have them interrogated as they should be. So I think you want to hold the government accountable. You want to hold any company like Othram that brings technology accountable, and you want to hold everyone accountable. And you want to discuss this, because here's the thing: I'm not afraid about accountability. What I'm afraid of is that if we don't discuss the technology, then it doesn't get better. Like the interrogation of technology is what drives its improvement. And so, so we, like I said, we publish everything. We even, you may not know this if you're not like a science nerd like me, but scientific journals, they make you pay like a fee to make the material open access. Otherwise, you have to like subscribe to the journal, and it's very expensive. So we even paid the fee to open access it to everyone. So all of our research is open access. I encourage everyone to look at it, ask questions. If we're doing something wrong, tell us. We'll always do better. But it's not just solving the case, like you said, it's doing it in a defensible way. Our company has been dragged into court for this technology more than anyone else on Earth, and we love honestly going.
Yeah.
It's the only way to get this adopted. I mean, when this has been used in court, 500 times, then there won't be as much anxiety. So, anyways, we're very excited.
Yeah, once you get past Daubert and Fry, like after a certain amount of time, your technology is then accepted as science. That's
so long before Koberger. Yeah, long before Koberger, way back. If you're old enough to remember 2020, I'm kidding. Back in 2020, we worked the case. It was the Carla Walker case, and it was the first time that someone was going to be essentially accused of murdering and in this case, unfortunately, sexually assaulting someone in Texas and then being drugged into court. These cases weren't going to court. They were kind of like, we'll leave the technology out on the outside. So this actually became the key piece of court. And the very first thing we went is to a Daubert hearing in which a body of our peers had to weigh in on whether this science was real. Is this science fiction or is it science fact? And then after the Daubert hearing, we went to court. We were cross-examined. And we've now done this many other times in Texas and elsewhere. But yeah, it's very important to interrogate this work in the scientific community in the courtroom. So no objection from me. Very excited to be able to talk as much as I can about it, so we can just make it, better and better and better.
Yeah, I could spend hours talking to you about like all kinds of stuff. But and when I came on the tour, the thing that really impressed me was the fact that you were peer reviewed and you guys were excited to be peer reviewed, that you wanted people looking at your work. And I referenced it earlier, but I had a case wherein Alice and I, there was DNA was a very critical part of the state's case. And during the 3 years that it took in terms of the pendency from arrest to getting to trial, they found another lab named True Allele that came in, and they came back with a huge number. They're like, oh yeah, it's 1 in about 7 billion that this is your guy. So we had hired Carl Reich, who I know to be a brilliant DNA guy. The guy knows his stuff. He's a lab rat, but he has a real skill in being able to kind of educate people and tell lay people how DNA works the same way that you can. Like, you've got that skill. You're able to kind of break down a very intricate and very difficult kind of science into a way that lay people can understand it. And that's kind of Reich's superpower too. But at any rate, we came in and Reich's like, well, I need to see the work. Is this garbage in, garbage out? I need to be able to vet what this guy is doing. This guy is saying that he came up with the result, but he's not willing to show his work, because this guy, unlike Othram, is like, my algorithm's my entire business model. I'm not willing to give it to Carl Reich. If I give it to Carl Reich can then just copy it. And then my business is worth nothing. So the judge actually kept True Allele out at that point. But, so it's like, so I knew that coming in. And when you were like, look, it's all out there, we're not trying to hold the cards close to our vest at all. We want people to vet it. And so I just knew that you guys were built differently.
The secret sauce at Othram is going to be the scale, right? Like, being able to do this at scale and ensure that everyone can have access to these tools and no case gets left behind. That's the business model.
Sorry, Dave. My wife's. Do you need to walk past? My wife's getting ready for court, so give me 1 sec.
Good luck in court.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
So, that's interesting to me. I'm not interested in a specific algorithm or a specific tool. We work with other groups, and we're working with this will not be of wide interest to your listeners, but there's this consortium of public labs called NTVIC, and all the public labs have gotten together because they want to begin to insource this technology, and we're working to help them do that. So I'm a big fan of everyone using this. You don't want every crime scene running through one lab in the Woodlands, Texas. That would be terrible. Talk about huge point of failure. So we are trying to get this vetted and distributed. But I'll tell you what, if I came onto your podcast in 2018 and said, man, do I have the tool for you?
Right.
You'd be like, well, prove it. And so we spent a good number of years building a showcase lab, one that we continue to show to everyone. And we love having people come down, whether they're lay folks, whether they're lawmakers, whether they're prosecutors, defense attorneys. We want everyone to come by there and see it, because I'm hoping it infects people with the enthusiasm that I have now, and they go back and say, my public lab needs this stuff. So yeah, we're very interested in seeing this reach scale. And I think, I don't know if you read the New York Times, but I think it was. I do. So I don't know if you remember, but like the week before last, they had this article. I think it was like July 8th. They had this article. It basically talked about most of the violent crimes being unsolved. Basically says there's like a coin flip chance you're going to get caught if you murder someone.
Right. I do remember that article.
That's right. Yeah, it's a very interesting article. And then it points out, like, the real deterrent to crime is getting caught, not the severity of punishment, not how many years you're going to go to jail or whether there's capital punishment on the table. It's really all the research in criminal justice says if you think you'll get away with it, then you're more likely to do it. So that's the problem that we want to attack, right? Is like, why is there a coin flips chance that you'll get caught for doing something so terrible? Like, right. Change the odds, and you're not just solving cases, helping families, but you're preventing future victims. So anyways, you should get other labs and other folks onto your show, and you should say, why aren't you publishing? Where's your peer-reviewed science? Pressure everyone else into doing the right thing.
I would like if they come on, but they're not you. You know what I'm saying? Because that question's a hard question to answer in terms of, because the answer is obvious. It's money, but so people that were giving Othram shit early on about, they're for profit. I'm like, I don't care, because what they do is they drop every dime they get back into R&D.
We've never had a family. Yeah. We've never had a family say, I would prefer my case to be solved by a nonprofit lab.
Right.
That's never happened. So we try to serve our customers, and our customers are really the families that are pissed off that they have no answers. And none of them have ever said, I want justice, but only if it's nonprofit justice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's never been a problem. And by the way, nobody here has ever said, I'd like a cell phone, but only a nonprofit cell phone. And none of you guys are working on nonprofit computers. And so sometimes there are business structures that are more amenable to technology. Those tend to be, private companies. But I think, again, you judge, there are wonderful for-profit companies and terrible for-profit companies.
100%.
There are wonderful nonprofits and terrible nonprofits. And there are wonderful government agencies and terrible government agencies. So I think you judge people based on their behavior.
Exactly.
It all comes down to outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. And the baseline for Othram has always been this. Again, when you dump the money back into R&D, so that ultimately what happens is it skyrockets the results and it advances the technology that no one else can do, because it goes all the way back to when Kristen was talking about, well, how do we generate grants in order to be able to do this research? You've taken that as being the primary source out of the picture for y'all. Do you still want grants? Of course, it's free money. Who wouldn't? But having to rely solely on that is what puts up brick walls in front of you in terms of advancing the technology. That's why Othram, in terms of being for profit, and you guys dump all your money back into R&D. So that's why you're light years ahead.
We iterate very quickly. Yeah, I think Kristen does a better job expressing it than I do. But I just, but I will tell you that if you look at what we were doing 6 months ago, it looks like the Stone Age era compared to what we're doing now.
No.
We're literally iterating 3-4 times a year. It's absolutely wild. And so, would gladly welcome you or anyone back for a tour, just because we have a whole new part of the lab that's been built out, and we have, a new AI team that we built about a year ago. So this is all this new stuff happening. We spend every day wondering how we can do better at our current technology. And then we spend the rest of the day wondering how other things happening in the world could be translated to value in criminal justice. I still don't understand why, some of the best minds and some of the best technology, it just gets pulled into these weird directions. Amazon can tell you exactly what you need on your next purchase, but like we don't have basic tools to help investigators figure out like what's happening at the crime scenes. So I'm very big, and we're very mission driven here, as I'm sure you know. And so we're very big on recruiting people, and that's another kind of secret sauce. I don't care about algorithms. What I care about is I have over 80 people at Othram now that have ridiculous skills that they could monetize in so many industries, and they choose to come here every day and deal with what as I'm sure is not a fun industry sometimes, and is very, very kind of open to scrutiny, as it should be, and interrogation. And they come every day here. They can't wait to get to work. They're so excited to come up here because they know this could be the day that another case gets cracked open. And so that's what we're going to do. And if we solve a handful of cases, great. If we're able to make that seismic shift we're dreaming of, even better. But we approach it from like what new value have we brought to criminal justice today that we didn't have yesterday? And it ends up being a very simple first principle at Othram, and we all love doing it.
Yeah, and I was in your ear, when I was at the lab. I'm like, because from the for-profit model, in terms of, you guys obviously want to be able to partner up with law enforcement. I mean, that is a huge revenue source for you, and it should be, because you guys are able to give them tools for their tool belt that they did not have at their disposal forever, since the beginning of when there became cops, when they came up with the concept, hey, we're going to have a guy who walks around trying to solve who did certain things, back in the old West, when you had the sheriffs riding around on their horses trying to figure out who did shit. So we've come light years from that. And like, the reason I was in your ear, I'm like, look, I want you to use your technology for both sides of the coin. I want you to be able, and you've addressed it already, in terms of, I want you exonerating people, because there's something incredibly fulfilling from your end to freeing a man who's been in prison for 25 years for a crime he did not commit. And you're able to say, okay, well, that DNA that they found on the leg were, close to the genitals on that person that they'd never been able to get a profile on. Well, we just got a profile on it, and there's no other reason that particular DNA would be there other than if that person was involved with the sexual assault. So you've now exonerated a guy that spent that. From your perspective, that's equally exciting, or even more so, because you've just given somebody back their freedom who's still alive.
It's the ultimate erosion of trust in criminal justice to identify the wrong person. So I think what we need is just more of the truth. You're not going to get that by hiring 1,000 more detectives. Like there's a limit. Like it's like the U.S. postal system, right? That was never going to go to scale until Eisenhower built the highway system in this country, right? It's like you just can't get enough people and donkeys to deliver the mail. It doesn't work. And so in the same way that you need infrastructure and technology, the same way that you have a power grid that powers all the homes in America, you need a way to power justice. You need a power grid for justice, and that's powered by technology. So that technology should belong to everyone in criminal justice, whether you're exonerating, defending, prosecuting, whatever you're doing. And it needs to be available to all, because again, it all comes down to this. If we know the truth and the details are really clear, it makes it a lot easier. I mean, even the court process is a lot simpler. So attack the court.
That's what the search is for, David. It's like justice and the truth aren't necessarily always the same thing, right? It's like, if you have a wrongful conviction, justice was not served, not for the families of the victim, not for the victim themselves, and certainly not for the person who is now going to prison for the rest of their life for a crime they didn't commit. So there was no justice there. And we're also dealing with the fact that the truth wasn't gotten to. So what you guys are able to do is shrinking the error rate in that by
time. I think the truth is insufficient for justice. But I also think that justice is impossible without the truth, if that 100%. Makes sense.
It
And
totally
so,
makes sense.
so you have to start from a position of certainty, and you have to know what happened. And it's from that common set of facts that you can then decide what the appropriate avenue for justice is. And so it's a nuanced point, and I think you could spend a whole nother hour talking about it. But
Dude,
I hope people think about that. Is that the truth is the entry ticket to justice. There's more work to be done once you've got the truth and the certainty. But there is no justice if you don't have foundational truth before you go into court, and that's the concern that I have. And the concern is 100x more for me when I know there's technology sitting right now here in the Woodlands that's available, and I worry that it's not being effectively deployed or as broadly deployed as it should be. So we do the best we can do. We're a small team, and we're more science people than we are really experts in necessarily the details of prosecution and the details of how you defend folks. But we certainly do our best to get the word out, to lead by outcomes, and we've never turned anyone away. I would be more than thrilled to have as many defense attorneys come our way as well. We have you guys should look up this case. It's a terrible case involving Chester Uygur out of your
the Star of Rock.
So this is a famous case. If this guy's exonerated, and unfortunately he recently passed, which is terrible, but if he's exonerated, this will be the longest incarceration in U.S. history of someone that shouldn't have been put in prison. And here's the crazy thing: they found some hairs from the crime scene, and one of the girls had these hairs, was clutching these hairs, and we were able to figure out they did not belong to Chester, and we've actually attributed them to someone that is not even remotely a genetic relative to Chester Uygur. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and the path from that to an exoneration is unclear to me, and this case continues in the system. But you should follow it, and it's a good example of us again trying to assist on both sides of the table.
Yeah,
we have no interest other than understanding with certainty what happened and arming the members of criminal justice with facts that they can work from, from a common place.
Yeah, and it's to me, it's the most exciting thing about what you do, because I know that your lab is more than willing to be on both sides of that table, because both things are ultimately aimed at the same goal, which is the truth in terms of.
We've met a lot of prosecutors and a lot of defense attorneys, and I'll tell you, they all seem pretty excited about it as well. I mean, I'm telling you, it's the lack of consistent facts between the two that creates the conflict. I've not met a prosecutor that's out to get somebody. They want the truth as well. They don't want to prosecute. I mean, the case in Michigan where we tested the cigarette butt, the request did not come from the defense. The prosecutor wanted to make sure that they had examined every possible fact. So I think I'm encouraged by the way people behave in criminal justice. I think internally they all want the right thing. They just need to be armed with facts.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes what you see, and you'll see it throughout the course, and it's not I'm not laying a blanket indictment on all prosecutors, obviously, because there's excellent human beings that do that job. It's an incredibly important job. It's what helps bring really bad people to justice, and we need them in those positions. But you'll see too often from the side of post-conviction work, wherein you have prosecutors that weren't even necessarily the prosecutors that were involved in the case. If it was a case that was 10, 20, 30 years old, wherein it's an office, that is saying, all right, well, we're not necessarily willing to make that leap. And it is like moving mountains, trying to get somebody out of prison that has been convicted. It's just a very difficult thing. I'm so excited because I think that you guys in particular are going to be a vehicle to make that somewhat easier, because you guys have the technology to be able to do it. And, I've been knee deep, neck deep, whatever you want to call it in a case, and I talked to you about it with Richard Allen, that Delphi case, tragic case. 2 little girls lost their lives. Richard Allen has now been convicted, and there has been a lot of DNA that was not tested in that case, that I am very much hoping that when we get to the post-conviction work there, that all of that work is coming to Othram, so that we can hopefully get an answer, because there's people that are convinced that he's the guy. He's Bridge guy. He did it. He was there. And the problem with that investigation like many investigations, and there isn't a perfect investigation because you're dealing with human beings. There's always going to be things that missed. Technology advances to where people were saying, okay, well, our lab wasn't capable of doing the testing because they were saying the sample was too degraded. Well, you know what? There's this little lab down in Texas called Othram that's going to be able to take that degraded DNA profile or sample that you have, and they're going to be able to develop a profile on it. And everybody deserves to know. Richard Allen deserves to know. The victims' families deserve it, because that's one of those cases where you have this wide divide of people that are like, we believe that he's factually innocent, and there's people that are like, that guy's guilty of sin, he was the dude. And in post-convictionally, I cannot remember a case where it's been kind of evenly split on both sides still, even post-conviction. And I think that Othram, frankly, holds the key to answering the question, whichever way it comes down. Whichever way it comes
just
down.
See the truth. Yeah. I mean, even not knowing the truth in itself just creates a huge burden on criminal justice. A lot of time spent that could be dedicated to working other cases.
All right. So I'm like, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I could spend hours with you. I have two asks. When the Koberger stuff is released, I want you to come back because a lot of people have been asking questions in the chat about chains of custody, Miss Potts and Lana from True. There's a lot of people. I have always been in the mindset that was a very powerful case because of the sheath, because of the DNA that was on the sheath, where the DNA was found on that sheath, or the sheath itself was found. I would love for you to be able to come back to be able to answer questions that I know that you probably can't answer right now, but we're very close to the point where you can. And I know for a fact you're game. I know you want to be able to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and again, most of the things that are being circulated, as concerns, I think I'm happy to address any of them. But I think what you'll find is as these documents come out, you'll realize like it was all. I hate to say it, but a lot of it was just BS. So
I mean, it's like
so.
People, like you said, if you have a case that's been sealed, people are going to have to speculate.
They get restless. Yes, the internet runs wild. I don't know how I'll ever be able to trust the media again after seeing all the reporting on this case. Now there's things I don't know about, like in the world, and I wonder, are these true or are these not? So I've had a little.
So I definitely want you to come back, man, because I just know from the limited time that I've been able to spend with you and like the times that we've chatted since then, that you're just a straight shooter, man. Like you're just a dude that's out there really like genuinely trying to do good in this world. And the problem with it in terms of how it's being used by law enforcement, and this is again another conversation that I'd love to have with you because it would take too long, but in terms of the privacy rights of citizens and the use of specifically IgG in terms of like because I've made the argument, and again, this is a thing where we could probably have like a really great conversation. I think that I do and I've had this argument with prosecutors that I think that us as individuals have a privacy interest in the DNA sample of a family member, whether it be my father, whether it be my second cousin twice removed, whoever that case may be, because we do share that profile, that I can make an argument that there is a privacy interest in it, wherein, because typically, like say, for instance, David, the cops go in, like say I robbed a store and then I went over to my buddy's house. I'm like, oh man, I got to hide all this shit in your place, man. I'm going to put this gun under this thing here. And I'm going to put this other thing that I touched and I'm going to leave it under your sofa. And then the cops come in there and they do an illegal search on my friend's house. All right. I don't, as an individual who has no privacy interest in that residence, I have zero standing to be able to say, okay, well, I want it excluded because you violated my privacy rights by searching my friend's house illegally. I have no standing to do it. What I'm saying in terms of DNA, because there's nothing on the planet that gives us more information than DNA in terms of biologically speaking. So and I think that that's ultimately going to be litigated to the point where there's going to have to be statutes that are going to be developed by the legislature. And then that will get figured out through the court systems as well. Because my argument has always been, this tool is too powerful for law enforcement not to be able to use. But my argument is, in order to rein them in so that they're not, because
Sure,
when
there
you
needs to
have
be
that powerful,
guardrails and a regulatory framework. And I think,
yes,
and I don't think that's something that just gets introduced overnight. I think
right,
there have been many iterations, and just like you iterate and refine the science, you've got to refine the legal structure in which these tools are used. Because without the two together, you have a recipe for abuse or misuse. So
that's where
100%
my
on
fear
board.
lies, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like you've got private databases with the companies out there where it's pretty easy for law enforcement to say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to sign up and then I'm just going to throw it in there, and then I'm able to search a database that's, you know, earmarked as private. Whereas if the person who has provided their profile says, okay, I'm willing to share, which a lot of companies have that option, you could say, yeah, I'm willing to allow my profile to go into the database so that they can sort of because I want to help. I want to be out there. I've got nothing to hide. You know, I want my profile to be in there so you have it.
We actually were concerned about this issue. So we built a database. Our DNA Solves database allows folks like you to join our database if you're looking for someone missing in your family, you want to help solve a crime. But our database cannot be publicly searched, cannot be searched by you, can't be searched by law enforcement. So it is, and you know, you can read it. You're like, oh, I don't trust Othram, then don't participate. But as much as we can, we've restricted it because in the same way that you can't publicly search COTUS, I don't know that it makes sense to publicly search, you know, forensic databases or databases used in a forensic way, because you mentioned it yourself. Like, how do you police that? So maybe the answer is they shouldn't be openly searched. DNA Solves is used as you consent to solve a case, but the database doesn't do anything. So it's like the only reason you'd put your data into DNA Solves is to solve a case. And we're very careful about not returning anything else to the person, so it doesn't feel like, you know, it's like a bait and switch. And also, Othram, as you know, only works in forensics. All we do is identify people from crime scenes or remains. So nobody comes to Othram thinking they're getting this and it's something else. Like we're remarkably clear about our mission because we only have one mission. And so I don't think that's the answer for every company, but that's how we've dealt with it. Is like, look, early on we were like, you know, DNA has a lot of uses. Maybe we could help in a lot of areas. And we made the editorial decision that we're going to focus on this one problem. Because again, this is a huge impact problem that is just underserved. Like where else have you seen a place like Othram where you can do this kind of work? And then where else can you see a place where you can do it at scale in a way that can provide answers in a real-time case where, you know, this case, you know, involving Kohlberger or this other related case with Rachel Marin, where not related because of the same circumstances, but another case that was real time, we're able to build DNA profiles in these cases in a matter of days. So this isn't one of those things where you send it out in a few months. Like we can get information literally in you know, in just a couple of days. And that was what we were able to do in 2022. We can now build information from DNA in the same day. And there's no reason to think technology won't continue to improve. So we want to keep perfecting the technology. We want to make sure it fits in context with how forensics is supposed to be done. And then we want to make sure it fits into context with how criminal justice should be done, because the tools come and go, and there's new tools and there's old tools. But the way you handle yourself in criminal justice is something that's been debated for decades. And so you can really benefit from, you know, 100+ years of case law that really describes at the core how do you exhibit fair and kind of evenly distributed justice for all. And that's something that needs to be
man, and that is just
considered.
absolute music to my ears, you know, because I mean, ultimately, then you're doing the ultimate good. You know what I mean? Like then you're not couched as being either, you know, a government lackey or you know, a defense lackey, because what all you're trying to get to is the truth.
We work in other countries, and every country, I mean, even in America, like each state and even sometimes each agency has their own kind of rule sets and how they do things. But in other countries, there's entirely different sets of parameters and expectations for privacy, for legal frameworks. And because we build our own technology, everything we built is in-house, and we've built it ourselves. We can develop custom workflows for anyone. So I don't really care. Whatever we converge on is the right way to do it, is the way we're going to do it, because we could build anything. Honestly, I'd rather build something people want to use. So it's not like we have any skin in the game in terms of influencing how how the process works. We just want to benefit from people that are probably more skilled than we are at discussing these things in court to develop the frameworks. And then our commitment is just to make sure that we deliver the best possible scientific answer within those frameworks. So anyways, I think we see eye to eye on it. And
100%. Like,
really
and one of the things that you mentioned when I came down for the tour, when we kind of were sitting in for the lecture portion of it, was that really excited me, because I've run into it so many times in my own cases, wherein you talk about that degraded sample where the lab has gone ahead and they've done the testing knowing that they were going to destroy the sample. They were going to degrade it to the point where it couldn't be used anymore. And when you guys were like, one of the first things we do, because that degradation problem is not nearly the problem for your lab as it is for, say, probably every other state lab on the planet, that you guys say, all right, look, this is where we're at. Like, if it is such a degraded sample that you're like, we're going to use the very last of it, but we're going to go and let everybody know on the front end, before we do the testing, that we're going to be able to know that if we do this, this is going to be the last shot at it. And like, for me, that was music to my ears, because there's so many times where you have a case where you do have a very, if it's just a minute, minuscule profile or sample, and you're like, man, like, I mean, even with our lab, we're going to be probably exhausting the DNA that was available from whatever that is. And, just you being upfront with it on the front end to everybody that's involved, saying, if we do this, it's done. So we're going to leave it up to y'all if you want us to do the work, because that's huge, especially from the defense side of it. Because if the state in kind of their pursuit of justice says, all right, well, we got to test this. If it's going to degrade it, it's going to be degraded, have at it. And then they come up and they couldn't develop a profile from it. Well, then my guy, if he ends up getting convicted, is screwed. You know what I'm saying? Like, down the road, because of the way that they handle that. So the way that you guys handle it, which is so different, and it's really exciting to me in terms of the advancements that have occurred. And I'm just, I see eye to eye with you guys on everything. And the reason why is because of your transparency, because your transparency speaks volumes to everything that you guys are doing. Like, the concept of being absolutely not only fine with being peer reviewed, but wanting to be peer reviewed, because your shit's peerless. You know what I'm saying? You're like, yeah, have at it. Go at it.
I mean, look, if it's not, then we want to know and we'll improve it. I mean,
Exactly.
the best way to defend yourself is to take the back and do better. So anyways, I love it. And this is something we all doing. We all come to work just to work on this problem. So, everyone's here by choice, not because, they couldn't get a better job at the medical school or something.
It's a passion play, man. It's a passion project for all of you. And I got that sense when I was at the lab, like, everybody was there. You're typically going into a typical workplace and you see a lot of brooding, unhappy people. And I didn't get the sense that, Kristen was walking around telling everybody, I want you to have smiles when everybody's in here taking the tour. You could tell that people genuinely enjoyed being there, because I think what everybody that is there realizes that you guys are doing really important, cool work that is really just driven by getting answers, which is really something that people love, especially in the true crime community, and it's a strange community. We're a weird little community, but we're always trying to crack cases, and you guys are the ultimate at cracking cases in terms of what your tools are. Speaking of which, one of our ride or dies, and you may or may not be able to talk about it, but how is it probably the most famous unsolved case, which is John Benet Ramsey. Anybody who follows that case knows that Othram's involved now. Is there anything that you can tell us about John Benet's case? Have you guys made any progress?
We've offered our support in that case and lots of cases. So if we end up working on some piece of evidence and we learn something, and then I'm sure agencies would be screaming it from the rooftops, but we'd work with them to get the news out. I have nothing to hide. I just don't have any information. So,
all right. So have they allowed you guys to start working on that yet? Are you guys involved with it yet? I know you've offered it. Have they taken you up on your offer? I guess is the question.
I'm pretty sure that folks on my team have been consulted about it. But I'm not sure that we're doing something at this moment. So
Well, I know one guy in particular that definitely wants Othram involved, and that's John Ramsey. He wants you guys involved because like their name has been, and there's still people that are just hell bent that family did that, and I've seen him and I've heard him say.
I'll tell you right now, like I don't care what the case is. I don't care if it's the most famous case or a case no one's heard of. If there is DNA evidence that we can work with, and we turn things down if we don't feel confident. If there is DNA evidence that we can help with, even if it's a case no one heard of, we will never turn it down. And if it's a funding issue, we'll go find funding. So if we're not shouting from the rooftops about the case, then we either don't have evidence that we can use, we're not allowed to put an update, or maybe maybe like with Kohlberger, we're gagged. But I mean, I think it was discussed in court many times over the last couple of years. I lost track of our involvement. We certainly are not motivated to do anything but to help. But an active investigation, we're not going to get on the internet and talk about it because we don't want to interrupt the investigation. It would be a tragedy to solve the case, only to find that someone misbehaved either on the prosecution or defense side, and now there's a mistrial. So like we don't want that kind of scenario. But right. Yeah, we'll never turn on a case if it can be worked. But not every case has DNA that has been identified that is good enough. We've certainly lowered the bar to let more cases in, but there are cases that are challenging, and there are cases that we may need to work on again later as the technology improves. So once you test DNA, it's gone forever, and whether you get an answer or not. And so you just want to be careful that you're not rushing. And our biggest concern is always, if we're going to get involved in any case, that we're not taking an unnecessary risk. And that's what you were talking about. That's what Kristen was talking about. We happily reject cases if we have to, and we'll come back to them. And most of the cases we've rejected, we've gone on to work eventually. But there's just a lot of research and development. There's a lot of what we do is we'll generate mock casework, and we'll generate like synthetic examples of that, and really test the process before we go try something out. Like the worst case scenario would be to make the casework the experimental kind of guinea pig for the method. That would be a terrible thing. So we don't want to do that. And I didn't get to see all the comments. There's so many comments.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. I didn't either.
Yeah, but someone had mentioned, I just want to address this. Someone had brought up, actually, I thought, a really fascinating point. They said, what about the scenario where you have DNA and you have someone that you might think be a family member? If those two mix together, I'm butchering the question, but I think it was, if those two things mix together, then how do you know that you're able to test them independently? And this is actually a really important question, and it's actually why you should always use forensic labs. Ordinary labs like medical labs, research labs, they just run everything together. One of the first tenets, there's a couple tenets of forensic labs, but one of the first tenets in forensics is that you never run knowns and unknowns together. Because if you do risk the possibility. What if there's contamination or crossover? How do you know if they're related or now they look related? So, right. So these are the kind of things that I'd be happy to talk about in the future. But there are some amazing guidelines that have been established in forensics decades before Othram even existed, and these guide rails are applicable whether you're using old technology, new technology, Othram, something else. There are guiding principles in forensics that have been conceived by super smart folks that really help mitigate some of these situations. So that's another fascinating topic.
So can you see this one here, David? It says, Bob, I'm begging you, ask him how they doubled the text file. And I'm assuming this is Kohlberger, how they doubled the text file for the sample so my brain doesn't melt.
Yeah, so that didn't happen. So this is what happens when you hire someone. I don't want to point fingers, and I want to be careful so I don't get slapped. But when you hire someone that is an idiot to comment on something they don't understand, for example, if you were to hire me to advise you on defense strategy, you'd get a similar kind of output of response. So that never happened. But this is one of those many things that we can delve into the details. That I think there's transcripts that are available. So I think anyone that wants to read the transcript can. But these are one of the many things that did not happen that, I think I don't know if it was intentional or accidental, but perpetrated by someone that I hate to be rude, but was an idiot. I say idiot as opposed to uninformed, because uninformed is like when you ask me where the good restaurants are in Chicago, and I don't know because I don't live in Chicago. It's idiot level when you go to a capital murder trial in which so many people are impacted and justice is so key. And when you bring misinformation there, it's a lot more serious than like recommending the wrong restaurant. It's really steering people, including the defense, in the wrong direction. And I think it's honestly, it's inexcusable and unforgivable.
Yeah, well, that was an amazing answer. And that's exactly why when all this stuff drops, when all the Koberger stuff is unsealed and it's out to the public, because I understand
It'll be
from
your more spicier episode.
yeah, it'll be great. And speaking of episodes, we haven't talked about it yet, but I'm super excited. The first 2 episodes of the new iHeart podcast, America's Lab, has dropped.
America's Crime Lab. Yeah, you guys should check
America's
it out.
Crime Lab has dropped, and it's amazing. Tell us about it.
Okay, real quick. So I discovered early on that except for you and like 3 other people, no one loves to hear David drawn on about science. But again, I'm really big on outcomes. I really want people to understand that all these cases that have no commonalities at all are getting solved the same way using DNA testing. So we started a podcast in collaboration with a production company called Kaleidoscope and with iHeart.
Mhm.
Some of you may have heard of iHeart. And it's called America's Crime Lab. You can find it everywhere: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I'm not a big podcast person, so wherever you can listen to this podcast, I'm sure you can listen to that one. And we tell the stories, but here's what's really cool: the stories are all told from the perspective of the detectives and the family members. So the very first case we're featuring, the first 2 episodes are up. It's the Carla Walker case. The conclusion is going to come out tomorrow on Wednesday, the 23rd. And I encourage you guys to listen to it, even if you know a little bit about the case. Jim, who's Carla's brother, talked about things that he's just never talked about before. It's just a very raw and impactful thing. And honestly, it's not just good for outcomes. It's good because sometimes people get carried away on the internet and they lose the humanity, the human side of these investigations. And it's important to know when you're talking about these cases and people are having these lively debates. There are real people that are harmed and affected by this. Jim
100%.
Walker spent, I kid you not, 46 years, tried to become a police officer himself, lived in the same house for decades, hoping to crack his sister's murder. And it really just put his whole life on pause. And after this case was solved, he just became a different person. It was amazing. And doing that for Jim is something that's very special to me, but doing that for everyone in this country at scale, that's something that you can really be proud of. So yeah, America's Crime Lab, if you check it out, if there are cases that you think should be covered, before anyone asks, we're going to do an episode on the Koberger case, and we'll do an episode on all the major cases that have interest. But I think it's an opportunity to hear from everyone that is using the technology, and not just from the guy that's building it, but like hear from everyone else, because it's amazing. Until you've been knee deep in it, you don't realize how many people's lives were touched. There's another case we're going to talk about, the Candy Rogers case. This is a little girl that was murdered in Spokane in '59. And the entire community was devastated by this for decades. So I just think it's very special to be able to, anyways, I could talk about it forever too. Sounds like everything we talk about, we could talk about forever, but I would love your feedback on the podcast, recommendations for cases to cover. And
Absolutely.
Of course would be thrilled to come back and talk on all or any of these topics. Get everyone to.
And I'd love to come on with you guys.
I would love to have you. I really think these stories are better told by the ones that are impacted by the case and the technology. Impact is what really makes us wake up in the morning.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I mean, it's the same for my former profession. Profession. I've left practicing. I'm pretty much a full-time content creator now, but it's like I did it for 23 years and it was very much in my DNA in terms of what I did for a living. And, because it's a results-driven profession from our end too. And from the defense side of it, it's just, if you feel like you have a client who has told you that they're innocent and you do the best that you can in terms of defending them and they get convicted, that's like a very heavy burden that you have that kind of lives with you forever. So I have a huge place in my heart for the work that you guys do, because it really does give me hope that in the future that what you in and of your company alone, what you and Kristen are doing is going to move the needle on exonerating innocent people more than anything else has ever done. Like, and
I really hope, yeah,
dude, is super exciting to me.
I really hope it does. And, I don't have a lot of experience in podcasting or in kind of the more media side of things. I never understood it. But I realize now, if you don't speak, that just creates a void for others to speak for you. So if you believe in advocacy, if you believe in getting the word out, and if you believe in the truth, then what are you to do? You have to hop on Bob's podcast. So here I am, and I'll be back, and happy to entertain any and all questions. And yeah, would really love for you guys to check out our podcast. And
yes, go do it now. When you listen to it, make sure. And just to be clear, we keep dropping the link in there. It's anywhere you get your pods. Like David says, he's not like at this point, he's early on in his podcast career, so he doesn't know the kind of the catchphrases, but it's available anywhere you can get your pods, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. So anywhere that you can get your podcast, you can download it. It's America's Crime Lab. It's an iHeart. So it's everywhere. iHeart has made sure that it is everywhere that you could feasibly get a podcast. And I listened to the first 2 episodes before tonight. I love you left it with an amazing cliffhanger. So you guys already know the formula. That's how you get them coming back. And dude, you are a true gentleman and a scholar. I'm so grateful that you came and hung with us today. You're just an awesome guy, and you and your wife are doing amazing work, and everybody that works in that lab with you guys, like you said, it's really a passion project, and the work that you're doing is just unbelievable. So I think everybody I thank you for it. And I hope everybody out there that had questions, as you can see, David's a pretty no bullshit type of guy. He's not afraid to have the discussions, and that's who we need. These are the kind of people that we need out there trying to get to that thing that we all want so very much, which is the truth, which is sometimes very difficult to get to. And Othram and the work that you all do is making that, even if it's a little bit easier, it's huge, in terms of the impact that you guys are having in our world. So congratulations on that. Congratulations on the amazing work. Congratulations on the podcast, because I think it'll be a huge hit, because you're a fascinating guy to listen to. It's like, you'd be surprised how many nerds there are out there, man. So there's an army of us, whether it's law nerds, science nerds, and you guys are in both of those areas. So, thank you again for being with us. And, you always have a home here. Anytime you want to jump on, you just text me, hey, Bob, I want to jump on, man. And we got you. All right.
Well, thanks to you. And thanks to everyone that listened. And we'll talk soon.
All right, David. Thanks, brother.
All right.
See ya. Dude's awesome. So yeah, we went almost 2 hours. I could have talked to him for 10 hours. And I saw some of the chats, y'all. I promise you, I wasn't trying to ignore. I was just trying to make it a fluid conversation. And in order to do so, you really have to listen to your guest. And David is such a fascinating guy. And it was the thing that I took away from the lab, which was really the reason that I wanted to have them on, because not just for the work that they do, and obviously from the criminal defense side of it, there's concerns, right? You are always worried about things. And Miss Potts, I saw a couple of your comments. I'm huge on chain of custody, right? I mean, that's where I live. That's where defense attorneys live, because we need to know who had the thing and where it went all the way down the line. And I need to know every bit of it. And if there's a break in that chain, then that's a real problem for me, because that's where you get things that have been tampered with. That's when you get evidence that's planted, all those different things. So I'll have him back when all the Koberger stuff comes out. I'm bringing him back, and he'll be here for it. He'll answer all the questions, all those folks out there, because I realize that when you guys are seeing Ann Taylor filing motions, that you may be accepting those things as fact, wherein sometimes it's just argument. And, once all this information comes out and it's accessible to all of us, I'll have David come back, and we'll have a 2-man, 3-man panel. Hopefully Allie will be able to join us, and we'll field questions all day from all y'all. It's like, I'm trying to get you guys information. And I just think that Othram right now is at the forefront of all of it in terms of, but like, and I brought it up with them, you know, there's a scary aspect of it. There is that fear of abuse by law enforcement, wherein I'm a big proponent. They need to get a search warrant before they start using IgG. That can't be the tip. Like, I don't like the way they call it a tip. It's much more than a tip. So, you know what? Go out, do the job, get some probable cause, and then go in and get a warrant. Then I think I feel fine with it, because then I know you've developed some other evidence that's sufficient enough to go into a court of law and get a search warrant. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, he had a pretty definitive comment to that, response to that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that I'm gonna trust David at his word there, because he's a pretty straight shooter. I don't think that they have shit to, yeah, like, he had no skin in that game. Like he said, no skin in that game. So from his perspective, you know, he'll come back and he'll answer all the questions. Pretty simple. You know, you can't ask for much more than that, right? Like, maybe I'll get the other side of it. Maybe the gal, and I forget what her name is. I think it's Leah something. Maybe she'll come on. That would be a great live, wouldn't it? See if she can answer some questions, you know, because it's like, it's a, right. Like, Miss Potts, this is where I'm at. This is exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I mean. That's why, like, and he addressed that. Like, and so with the DNA Solve site, that they took that out, where we as the public can't access it, nor can law enforcement. It's truly a database where you can put your stuff in there, because that's why I want to get him to where, and he's obviously game for it, to where Othram is working for both sides. Because you don't want it to be where law enforcement is going to say, where they're levying threats against Othram, saying, oh, well, you're going to start working with the defense side of this. Screw you. We're not going to use you anymore. You don't want that to happen, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are searching for the truth here, right? Like, I desperately want to get him involved in the lab, involved with Richard Allen's case. When all of that comes out, when we get to the post-conviction work, I am of the greatest hope that everything that they have DNA wise is going to get sent to Othram, and then we'll get answers. We'll get answers. We all deserve answers. Everybody deserves answers, and that starts with Abby and Libby and their families, and it starts with Kathy Allen and Richard Allen. Like, those people all deserve answers, because I'm not satisfied with what happened in that court, and I'm not satisfied with the process that led up to what happened in that court. I am not satisfied that is a conviction that should stand. I happen to think that Richard Allen is not guilty of those crimes. And, you know, like, I took a lot of shit for it, and I could care less. I mean, I think you guys have followed our channel long enough that I don't care. I don't care what people out in the outside are saying. I don't care what people. I'm going to have my opinion on cases, and you guys are allowed to have your opinion on cases. I try to base mine in fact and my experience in terms of being in the system for a long, long time. That's what I base my opinions on, and nothing more. You know, that's it. So, I love this. I thought it was great. I moved Bob Ruff, who's going to be coming on to talk about his new season of Truth and Justice, from tonight to Thursday. So I'm going on with Steve and Lauren Conlin over at Publicly Buzzed Thursday night. I'm going to probably try to push him back a little bit. I'm going to have Ruff on before I go over to Steve, and then we're going to hang with Steve. Lauren and I were going to hang with Steve on Thursday this week. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that right, like, leading into Steve. So it's going to be Thursday night, not tonight. That's why you're not seeing the link. But again, tomorrow we're going to obviously be covering the Koberger sentencing in the morning. And then I'm going to lead right into, I'm having Nikki Jackson, who I told you guys, who is the president and the main, the creator of the new exciting exoneration projects. It's just an exoneration network out of Purdue. And I've been asked to be a part of that board. She's going to come on. She's going to talk about the amazing work that they're doing. And I'm super excited about it. So that's going to be tomorrow. And I think we're coming on at 3. So make sure that you are checking your notifications. Make sure if you're new to the channel to like, share, subscribe. We'd love to have you here. I think that it would be a real benefit to you if you'd sub to our channel, because I think we put out some pretty good content. I think we have some pretty interesting conversations. And I love when we get to do these kind of things where we're not necessarily, just streaming a trial where we get to comment on that. I love having these types of conversations. I hope that you guys don't think that I talk too much. I tried to give David a wide berth because I know that people wanted to hear from him, but I also had questions I wanted to ask, and he answered all of them like the pro that he is. So we love you guys. We love you so much.
Goddamn
grifters. So I will see you guys tomorrow for the Koberger thing. Make sure, again, like, share, subscribe. If you're on Replay Crew, leave a comment. It helps get us in the algo. I think this is a great live. I think this is a great interview, and I hope that everybody helps get us out to the algorithm, because I think there was a lot of information in there that people needed to hear. And I thought it was just a great interview. So thank you, mods. We love you. Thank you, Mandy, for getting another great thumbnail done. Thank you for doing the work yesterday. Thank you, Tracy, for all that you do. I'm so appreciative to all you guys. I just adore you. And thank you guys. Oh, let's see. There were a couple. I don't want to go before doing the supers. Space Dude. Family hugs. Appreciate that. Member for 3 months. Love that. Freed. Member 5 months. Family. 5-month family hug. Love this community. And we love you back, Freed. Love you back. Thank you so much. Not That Mickey. Thank you for giving victims their names back. This is so informative. Thank you, Not That Mickey. I agree. I mean, the work that they do, and it's got so many prongs, right? It's got the John and Jane Does, the victims of like the cold cases that they're helping solve. It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's like, and they're cognizant that they have to keep a tight rein on it because of the potential for abuse by law enforcement and the feds, right? Like that's where, with great power comes great responsibility. And the thing that I feel super secure in is that the two people that are at the head of that, which is David and Kristen, are very much integrity driven people that are not driven by money. They're not, that's not their motive here. Their motive is to do right, to make things right, to try to get to the truth. And at the end of the day, if you've got people out there that are trying to do that, and they have the knowledge and ability and resources to help us get there, I mean, you have to applaud them. You have to applaud them, because I think they're they're amazing people, and they've done amazing work. And Othram's an amazing lab. And that's a hill I will die on. Tracy, is IgG normally used just as a tip? It is right now. That's the way they're quantifying it, is that it's a tip in the police cases your company has worked on. So like that's it. And again, like David answered that's not Othram saying that. That's the lawyers and the cops saying that they're using it as a tip. So I think that David answered that pretty thoroughly. So thank you so much for that, Tracy. LS, thank you, Othram. Your work gave someone their name back in Southern Illinois recently. We appreciate you. Yes, indeed. Spoogs, I got to your question. Luckily, you put it up there, because otherwise I never would have seen it. Indy Cindy, ask him, DNA survives laundry. What the hell? Oh, man, I wish I would have seen that. That was a good one. How does DNA survive laundry and to swim in the creek? I wish I would have seen that. But next time I have him on, and what I'll do next time before I get him on in the community page, I will put on, I'll put up a post, and I'll say, yo, send me, because it's really hard for me to look at the chat when I'm engaged in a conversation like that. I try to, but here you go. If you guys give us questions as we're rolling through, like I'll get to them if you've sent them to me ahead of time. So, because I know you guys will have a million questions, because it's fascinating. There's so many tentacles to this, right? Like from so many different angles. There's the science. I had questions about mixed profiles. Like how can they really tell who's what from a mixed profile? And that was something that I had going on in the Garcia case, where it was definitely a mixed profile. And Reich was like, oh, well, I could tell, definitively from who the major and minor contributors are. so there was a million questions. I mean, I kept him for almost 2 hours, so I was starting to feel guilty. But the next time he comes on, we'll be able to hit him up. All right, y'all. I love you. Make sure that you're listening to both Defense Diaries and America's Crime Lab over on iHeart. Also on Murder on Songbird Road. There are some really incredible updates that are coming on in that case. If you weren't necessarily sold on the fact that Julia Beverly is innocent, just wait. There's more coming. There's more coming. Because remember, when we were investigating that case, they did not give us access to any of the discovery. So we didn't have any of the police reports. So, all right, you guys, I love you. Thank you. Because without you, I'm just an old man talking about a bunch of cases. See you tomorrow.